Welcome. I'm Dawn Bjork with K-Squared Technologies. This is our monthly webinar training series sponsored by K-Squared Technologies. Today's session is on using Microsoft Word to create tables and forms. Although you may have been using Word for years, and perhaps possibly taking advantage of a lot of the features, there may be some aspects of it that you really aren't leveraging. And these include tables and forms. We're going to start off today by exploring some of the different tools for creating tables and formatting and how you can utilize these within your daily work with Microsoft Word. Now, tables itself can be really a separate component, but we're exploring this along with forms because tables become so critical for the creation of the layout for a form that can be completed in Word. So we often call these fillable forms, fill in the blank forms. We'll look at creating forms and also how we can finish them and use them and have them available for distribution. Now, when we get to the form section or section there, I want you to keep in mind a couple things. And one of the things is that we will build a table for the form structure. So as we'll see, by having a table, this allows us to really lay out where we want to position content, whether or not it's a form. I'll show you then how we can add form controls to your table, how we protect the form so that the users cannot change any aspect of the form except where you want them to complete data, and then how we can save and distribute the form. So those are some of the things that will be coming up in the second half of our time together. So let's go ahead then and explore. Now here we have a simple example of a table with tabular data. Typically, our tables are going to be set up within a larger document. So it's not typically going to be a standalone document. We'll have that we might use this as part of a report, proposal, those kinds of things. So it isn't, it can be something this simple. And although, as we'll see, it doesn't have to be the same number of rows, the same number of columns, or just with standard text. So this is just one easy example of how we can leverage or work with tables. Now, one of the reasons why tables are so important and so helpful for us in Word is in controlling the layout of our content. So let's look at this first example. This is what I see very often when we have signature blocks, let's say in the case of like a contract or an agreement, or even when you're trying to create your own version of a form that you would fill in. And there's all sorts of problems here. So it looks good until we ask people to try to fill that in. Now let's back up for just a moment. I do want to mention one of the key features that we need whenever we're working with tables, and this is also with long documents in Word. And that is in the Home tab of our ribbon. Make sure that you've enabled the Show Hide feature. This will show non-printing characters like hard returns. And that's really helpful for us with any type of layout in a document. So in this first example, we have text, and that's followed by the underscore character. So if I turn off that show hide, it gives us kind of this look of this is where you can fill in the information. And that might be fine if you're printing it out, but it's not going to work if you're expecting people to fill it in. But notice, even if you print it out, we have uneven edges to the right-hand side. It really isn't the best option for us when a table would be so much better. Because what happens here, let's just say if now we're asking someone to fill it in, and sure enough, okay, now they type their name, and if it's longer, that line might push down to the next line. And now we really have a less than professional look for our data. We can take that same intention and put it into a table. So here we have a table where we only have to format where we want to see lines. That is the thing to keep in mind with the table. In the previous example, there were borders all the way around. But in this case, we have a border only in the bottom of what would be called the cell. And with that now, if I type in the name, notice it's not pushing the edge to the right-hand side. We can put in lengthy content. And we can then move from one location to another very easily as well. Now, when I'm in a table, the other thing to notice is that we have two contextual ribbon tabs that become available to us. So at the top here, I have table design and I have layout. So we'll explore these in more detail as well in our training. So with this, and one of the things that in layout that I want to enable here is to view grid lines. So that will help you to be able to see the layout of this table. On the left-hand side here, I have view grid lines. And now the layout of the table can be a little bit more obvious here, even if we don't have borders in place. So that would be visible to your user. But if we want to print this out, for instance, and when I refer to printing anymore, it might be to a physical printer, but it also might be to a PDF. And if I was to go to print this, and I'll just go to Control P to go to print preview, you can see that those grid lines aren't displayed here. They are just to show you the borders or the boundaries of it. Now that takes us to another place where tables can be really helpful. If you're adding images within a document, a report, for instance, this is another place where we are able to then create a place. Once again, these are cells where I can drop those images within a table. So we have a lot of ways we can control layout through the use of a table. That becomes then another application for us. Now let's look at another example here. And looks like I'll want to open that up. So many options. All right. So here we have it, yet another table. Now in this situation, one of the real advantages we have too is that we're able to take lengthy text. So just as we would have text that automatically wraps in Word, it also automatically wraps within the cells of a table. And so this helps us to control things a lot easier than if we were trying to tab over or use indents and other applications. So here again, we can see that idea of being able to have a nice layout for content that might be inserted into the body of a longer document. So those are all different applications of working with the table. And we'll come back and talk more about especially what can happen when we have tables that might go across multiple pages and some other layout options. Certainly, as you have questions, do drop those into chat to let me know what you might want me to clarify or if there's anything that would be helpful. So let's start with a brand new document, and I'll just use Control and the letter N for new, because I'd like to cover some of the different ways to insert a table. And as I mentioned, we're going to assume that we will have content surrounding this typically. Now with that, it doesn't necessarily mean a table could stand alone like the previous example we saw in terms of a list of different food items. let's look at those options. So under the Insert tab, here is Table. And you can see that one way to create a table is to draw a grid. And that is, I could simply say, okay, this is about what I want. And we will then get that number of rows and columns. Each one of these locations is called a cell, very much like in an Excel spreadsheet. By default, we automatically have borders, but those can also be changed. Now with that table, if I move to the very last line here and I hit my tab key, I have another row. So that can help you as well when you're creating a table, that you might not know how many items you have, or you don't have to try to plan for every single entry there. We also would have the ability, of course, to, let's say I want to highlight these 2 rows. I could then insert, just right click here and insert, and say I want some rows above or below. And that's also going to be available to us in this layout tab. So once again, we have these 2 contextual ribbon tabs when we're in the table. Now, if I click outside of the table, those are no longer available. It's only when I'm in the table. But notice we also have these insert options here in the layout tab. And here we could insert and work with, so add more rows, add more columns. So that's always going to be an option with an existing table. Now, another option is to go to Insert and Table. And here we have Insert Table. Now, the difference is versus the grid, you have more control over how many columns you want and how many rows. And this can be helpful if you already know, let's say, you anticipate you need 20 rows. Well, rather than using the grid for that, then I could come in here and say, well, I think I need 4 columns and I'd like 15 rows. And with that, then you can see, now I could, if I was repeating the same thing over and over, I could do a checkbox here. We can change then the auto fit of the contents. So by default, then these columns will be evenly, the amount of space or the width will even be evenly split. So I'll simply okay here. And now we have another table, 15 rows, 4 columns, because we use that insert. So that becomes yet another option. Now there's some other options too that are available. They're probably ones that you're less likely to use. I'm going to go put in a page break here, Control Enter, just so we can kind of start fresh. And once again, then we can find this under Insert and Table. And these are to draw a table and an Excel spreadsheet. So we can actually embed an Excel spreadsheet into a Word document. Although that is an option, you'll probably find that there's some things that are a little bit cumbersome about that. And if you have an Excel spreadsheet, it may make more sense for you to take an existing spreadsheet and either copy and paste in the contents, or if the data potentially changes, to link it in. So let's instead look at this draw table. Now this is probably less likely to be an option, but I just want you to see here. So I am actually clicking and drawing to kind of create the boundaries of the table. Notice how my mouse is a pencil and I'm in this draw table mode. So I could actually then draw. And this is a situation where if you, let's say you're trying to recreate something that you have in a print form, and you know that it has some unusual dimensions. So maybe this is what I have here, but then I want to, as I'm creating it, I know that I want to have more space for text here, and maybe to divide it in this way. So this is most helpful if we're trying to recreate something that already exists. We could build this off of a standard table. It would just mean that after the fact, we're changing the height of our rows. We might be merging or inserting new cells and things like that. So this is the idea here with the draw, is that if you're comfortable with it, it gives you the flexibility of being able to draw. And in the process, you would also be able to change then the layout. For instance, what does the pencil look like? For instance, I could change my pen color here in that, and I could even go to the eraser if I realized, oh, I didn't want to put that divider here. So that gives you a lot more flexibility, but it may be easier for you to start off with the standard table and then move from there. So we'll move out of that feature and look at one other. And as I mentioned, that although it's possible, I don't really recommend that you use the Excel spreadsheet, because you'll probably find it can feel a little cumbersome you're using Excel tools within Word, and instead we can either leverage, do our work in Excel, or leverage how well Word works for creating tables. Our last option here is quick tables. So this is a choice that you could pick if there's a particular layout you you see something that you like with this. And this really hasn't, I'll say frankly, that this particular feature hasn't really been expanded on for years. So you probably won't necessarily find something that is exactly what you want. But the intention here is that you could build off of an existing format that's already done for you. So if you pick something like this, then you can see that you have that kind of layout. So those are some different options for you. It's likely you'll use one of the first two choices to simply build the layout in terms of how you might work with that. So let's go ahead and go back to our first couple examples. I just use Control Home to do that. Some other options that are available when we're working with tables. In the table design here, we have some different choices. So one of the things that can be helpful is you might decide that you don't want borders in certain places, or you want to have a particular table style. And we'll apply some of this to real life data, but here I have table styles. These are going to be based upon the theme that is defaulting for your document. And it could be something as simple as this. So now you're letting Excel build kind of a nice layout for you in terms of how you might work with it. You also have the option as well. Here, notice this little option here. This is to select or to grab that table and even move it. And in this case, what if I wanted to put a border all the way around the outside of this? Well, once it's selected, and by the way, you can go to Layout and choose Select, and this gives you the option to select particular elements like the entire table. Once I have this selected, I'll first go to my border styles. What type of border do I want? Maybe I want this thick outside border. Then we go to, and here again, I could paint this. So notice how my mouse has become a paintbrush. I could just paint and click on that, but I'm going to have that border style and then go to borders, and here is outside borders. Now notice I get a preview of what that would look like as well. And look, notice all the other possibilities. Where do I want to apply those borders? You have the option, you could say, put everything to no border and then add borders as needed. So that becomes another possibility for us. But definitely explore those particular choices, not only in terms of how you create the table, but then how you can format that. And once again, once we're in the table, we have some different options for our table styles. Now also notice here, I picked a different style and it overrode the changes I made to the border. So that's a good thing to know, and it's probably good to save frequently just as you are experimenting with these different options. Let's go back to our simple table here where we have data or content. As we are formatting and editing, it's good to know how to select some of the different elements too. And we saw before we could select the entire table by clicking on this four-headed arrow. We also could move to the bottom left-hand corner of a cell to just select that, because there might be something where I only want to format that one cell. Or we move to the top of a column and notice that we have this down pointing arrow, and now I'm selecting that entire column. So for example, if I wanted that column to be bold, I could then click bold, and now all of that is bold. So that becomes one of my options, or in terms of selecting. So we're always selecting to either format or to edit in some way, select, then do. It could be, I'll undo that for just a moment. It could be that I want to insert some rows. Saw this before. Select one or more rows. So the idea here is we're selecting to the left-hand side. And then notice as I'm hovering over this, I have a contextual like mini toolbar. So I could right click to go into a shortcut, but here's my mini toolbar. So here I could insert and say, perhaps I want to insert above. It's helpful to know, however, that there are sorting options available to us, so we don't necessarily have to keep inserting just because we're adding a new option. We always could sort after the fact as well, if that's helpful for you. So we'll undo that, but that is another option for you. That is, it's helpful to know the different ways to select so that you can make changes to a specific part of the table, whether you're deleting or other options that you might have. There's another important thing to keep in mind when you're working with a table. And this has to do with how you might resize. So for instance, here I want to make this a narrower column. And if I do that, notice if I come over here to the right-hand side of this column, see I have a double-headed arrow. I'm going to click and drag, and notice that what it will do is it's increasing the width of my third column. Because even though I'm making this column shorter, I'm holding down the mouse right now just so you can continue to see that. The table width is not changing. I'm just redistributing the space. So I just let go of my mouse here. I'm just redistributing the space. So when we increase a column, we're also taking it away from that as well. And so sometimes that can get to be a little bit difficult. That is, although this is the full width of available space, then this might not really be exactly how we want to work with it. So the whole idea, and one of the reasons why it's good to be aware of this, is where you click and what's selected matters. So if I selected just the cell, and now I come to the right edge, now I'm only changing the width of that one cell. And that might be exactly what I want, but we do want to be careful about what our intention is. Because sometimes it's not just all linear tabular data. You are setting something up for a form or some sort of layout that will vary as you move down the page. So those are some of the things to keep in mind there. So I mentioned where you click makes the difference. If you don't already have it enabled, one of the things that you'll want to do in working with tables as well as Anything else in Word really is to have the ruler enabled and to keep that turned on. So under the View tab here, we have Ruler, and that will help us quite a bit with tables. And once you turn it on and you leave Word and come back in, then the ruler will be enabled from that point forward. So I won't have to keep turning it on. But now let's look up here in our ruler. We not only see where our margins are in the left and right hand side, but we also see the indents for the current column we're in and the boundaries of this table. So if I don't need this column to be so wide, I could come to the right-hand edge just because it happens to be my last column, but instead I'll come up here to the edge and I can move that column, that table column. And this is also helpful because now I've got the size. And if I just came in here to the right-hand edge and dragged it, now I'm starting to take away from what's over in that third column. Instead, I'll move up into the ruler and move that column if I wanted this to be wider. So I'm able to then isolate and work with just those individual columns in terms of the width I want, rather than having it always change and draw from the overall available space. So that's one of the things that can be really helpful there too. A couple other tricks with tables. Keeping in mind when you're working with this, that there's a lot of easy options through this ribbon. So here I have my headings. Now I might want to make those bold. I could certainly select this, make that bold. That's easy. Maybe make them larger. And I also, if I'm in that particular row in layout, I can easily change the height or the width. So you may find that that is even easier than dragging and moving within that. That is, if I just wanted to change the height of this row, we can move into that. And I'll make this tall enough so you can see enough of a difference. If I wanted to change the width of this column, that would be another option without needing to go into the ruler or the edge of that table. And notice another thing here. I'll select this entire row. Over on the right-hand side, we have alignment. So this is helpful as well when we are wanting to get a specific appearance based upon that row height. Maybe I want those to be centered aligned. And that vertically, or I want it vertically and horizontally centered. So experiment with these different options to see what makes the most sense for the layout that you have. Now, let's look at a couple other things and then we'll some other tricks in working with layout in our tables. Often, as I mentioned, tables are part of a larger document. And in this case, I have a table and surrounding text. This is often with reports. So with this table, I'm going to actually move it so that it comes down into the text. And you can see that the text will wrap. So a table does not have to stand alone. It can actually coexist. Or maybe I want it to be over on the right-hand side. So that becomes another way for us to be able to leverage and work with tables without necessarily having them be a standalone in working with it. That is, if they're not completely from left to right-hand side, then those are available to us. So I hope that, that gets you some other options. Let's look at a couple other quick tricks with tables, and then we will shift into creating forms as well. Here I have a simple table, and there's a few things I'd like to do with this. One is I'd like this heading to go all the way across. And so that's called merging. You may be familiar with that in Excel. I'll simply select this entire row. So, just create it as a standard table with the same number of rows and columns. And now what I want to do with this, I'm going to go into layout and then choose merge cells. So that's an easy option, but it's good to know we also have split cells. So if you had a situation where I'll just move into this cell here, I really need 2 cells, but only in that location, I could split the cells and maybe I'll just have it be 2 columns. And now I have split those cells. Although I'll undo this, I just want you to see how easy that is as well. Here again, we have our different formatting options for that, for text alignment. And although we can also in the Home tab use different alignment options there, the difference we have when we look at layout is that we're looking at alignment not only horizontal, but also vertical. So those are all some things to explore in terms of how you might work with it. Here again, under our table design, this is where we can look at so many different options for how we could format this. So it could be something really simple. Now, because those didn't have numbers in it, for some reason, it was being a little bit odd. So I will put some numbers in that. And let's see if it explores those a little bit better. All right, well, that's all right. We'll go ahead and pick, could even be something as dramatic as this, where we may decide then we're going to change then the font to white. But those are also some choices. And of course we could center this heading and apply various changes to that as well. It's all about really just taking advantage of all of these built-in features. That is, all of these things that are available to us right away. So let's go back to our employee table for this. We'll go into table design and let's look at some choices here. Just keep this really simple here. And I'd like to insert a new column to the left. So here again, I could right click. There's some options there. I could use insert left. And just because I'm in that left column, it inserted to the left-hand side, that would be fine. I'll go ahead. I'm going to merge all of this. And I could use options here, right click. I'll merge the cell. And let's say all right, so this is my label for this, but this is taking up a lot of room, or I just really want this to be a label on the left-hand side. How do we handle that? Well, let's look at this under layout. Here's text direction. I can click on this, and this is what I meant to have. This is what I'd like to have. And I'll change my alignment here so that it's centered. And then that means too, rather than grabbing that edge, I'll come up into the ribbon and I can make this narrower there. So we've got lots of different options in terms of how we might lay out and format these tables. A few other pieces to wrap up here just so that you can really leverage what's possible for you. And let's look at sorting. Now, first, good to know that sorting is something where you cannot sort merge cells. So the previous example wouldn't necessarily be helpful for us if we wanted to be able to sort real quickly, or if we had merged headings, for instance. Sort is in our layout tab. And you'll find that over on the right-hand side. So if I want to sort this by the last name, we can just simply go to sort and notice what it will ask us here. What do we want to sort it by? Well, we could do it by the extension or other. We might have tiebreakers. We might want the department first and then by the last name. But in this case, I'll simply sort and just confirm here. Recognizes my list has a header row, so we'll okay. So it can be that easy. That becomes another option for you as well. And finally, how do we work with longer tables? Here is a table. It is 3 pages in length. And there's a couple things that we would like to improve on this. So this is primarily a standalone table. That is, the intention here is to share information that is in a column format. It wraps automatically, but there's situations, first of all, where the text from one entry is moving into the next page. So it becomes a little bit difficult to read. Also, these headings might be really helpful to be able to also see at the top of every page, just like it is in an Excel spreadsheet. These are all easy things that can be fixed. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to change back to my view here. It doesn't really matter how we're viewing this information, but let's go to our layout tab. So the first thing I want to do here is I'm going to highlight the first 2 rows. And in the layout tab, repeat header rows. Now what'll happen is that those rows, oops, and I forgot, it only is the top on that. So yeah, I get spoiled by Excel, but that's okay. So in this particular case then, we have the repeat header rows. It's on every single page. Now there's one other thing I want to do. When you want to change and get real specific about the layout of your table, let's go into properties. Now I'll go in, I can select the whole table, properties, which is on the left-hand side of layout. And here's what I want to change. Now, keeping in mind, I could select an individual row and just change that. I'm going to allow the row to repeat across pages. No, I don't want to do that. That's what's happening right now. That's why this content from Cozumel is coming across over here. So now let's see what happens when I say, okay, it all moved to the next page. And that's what I want for better readability. So those are some different tricks for tables. And now, how can we leverage tables to then add form fields so that we can actually get more power from them? I hope you've had a chance to see why, first of all, tables will help you with the layout of a lot of content in Word. But secondly, why we would want those for the layout of a form so that we really get a solid, consistent layout. For our forms practice, I'm going to just use this simple example that you can utilize the idea of it for your, I'll say probably more practical business forms. I have some information I want to collect. Now, when it's a fillable form, the intention is we want people to fill it out, but only be able to fill out certain locations. And then we might ask them to either email it to us or to print it. And so it could be a hard copy. It might be a PDF. There is a way for this content to also go to a database, but that becomes a lot more complex and more than what we're going to talk about. But for a fillable form, we want to be able to control the layout, what they can input, and where they can as well. So let's look at that. For this form, one of the things I want to do is, once again, in layout, make sure I view the grid lines. I want you just to see that even though I don't have borders for everything, that where those spaces are. Now that isn't necessarily required for some of the things we're going to look at, but it can be useful that you make sure you allow enough space for the answer that you want people to provide. And you can then make adjustments as that might shift. So let's look at how we can add form fields, protect the form, and be able to work with that. First of all, we need to do something to prepare for this. And that is we need to add another ribbon tab. It's an easy thing to do. Move up to your Word ribbon, right click. And with this, then what we're going to do is choose left click, customize the ribbon, customize the ribbon. Over on the right-hand side, we see all the ribbon tabs that are available. And there's one that is by default not selected, not enabled, but it's developer. So this gives us access to form fields, as well as being able to work with macros in Word and other features. I'll simply check this and choose OK. And now we have this developer tab. I don't want you to get too overwhelmed here because we're only going to be focusing on two places. One will be some of these controls that we see here, and the other is this restrict editing. So those will only be the things that we'll be looking at. Now with this, under these controls, we have different form fields. Here is rich text and plain text. The difference is that rich text lets us apply formatting. Typically not something we need for a lot of text fields, but it's an option. We could insert images. And with this, we could have a checkbox. We could have a combo box or a drop-down box. Those are very similar. The only difference, a combo box does let us put in our own custom controls, own custom content as well. And we can put in a date. So those are some of the primary fields that we'll put in. Let's start here with the date. I simply move to the location where we want to add that. And here is that date picker control. And then here is what the user will see. And I can what will happen is that they can use a drop down here to pick a specific date for that. Now for each of these form controls, you can choose properties. So if you choose properties, then this means that you have a few more things you can change. For instance, what's the background color for that? The display of that is a bounding box. That is the default, and that's usually the one that works best. But how do we want to display the date? If for some reason we wanted it differently, we could pick that option as well. But this one looks good, so I'll cancel out of that. Now, for this next one, I just want a regular text field. And for this, I'll simply come in and put in a plain field. Here again, there's an instruction, click or tap here to enter text. We'll see how that would work. That's the same idea here for the extension. Now for the department, I want to give people multiple choices, but there might be a department that I miss or something that I hadn't considered. So I'll use this content combo box. And let's look at properties. Here again, these top options here, title and tag, those typically work when we look at more programming, more automated features. So they really aren't as important at this point here. But what we have here then is, if the contents cannot be edited, we won't change that. I'm going to add a few things here. So these are just my departments. Okay. And we'll add another one. And you can see we could certainly add more But we'll keep us pretty straightforward here. All right. And by the way, under the properties, you could rearrange these. So if I wanted these alphabetical order, I could move these options up or down. And this is what they would look like. So that gives you kind of a sense of this idea of these controls. Now, the same thing would be true for location, but in this case, I'll use a drop-down list because there's only certain things that people can choose from. They don't get the option to put in their own information, for instance. And all right. So once again, and we'll okay out of here. Once again, it's a drop down with an instruction. So pretty straightforward. For this next one, what I'd like to do here is I want to add a checkbox. So it's just going to be if they check it, then that means that they're planning to take the bus. That's all we need to do. But you can see how easy that is. I could go to properties here. And what does that check symbol look like? So if you wanted to, you could get very specific about, if you wanted those to be specific symbols, or if you wanted it to be a checkbox, or if you wanted it to be something else, you could certainly change that and, experiment with these various options that are available here. And probably a lot more than what you need. But if you did want them to have some different choices, certainly that would be a possibility. Okay, so if I just wanted that to be a checkbox, for instance, I could do that. And you can see. All right. So then our next one. And by the way, a spacebar is how you get a checkbox. Number of tickets, that will be a text box. Content. So those are the basics here. Now there's a couple different things here. I'm going to add for comments. If for some reason someone needed to add some comments with that, I'm going to put that in as rich text. That simply means that they'll have the ability to format that if I want to. And I might add some things to the comments. So to make that a little bit clearer. But each of these just is pretty straightforward. There isn't usually a lot that we need to change with those properties unless we're using it just to add content. Now this is a little bit more specialty piece that is often not necessary. However, once you receive the form, maybe from the administration or the office side of it, you want to be able to have a place where you can put in more comments or other additions. Here I've added what's called a section break. Now in this case, it's a section break that's continuous. And that means we have a section break from section 1 to section 2 that stays on the page. It's not giving us a new page. Section breaks, by the way, are found under layout, and here we can add that. So we've created a section 2, and we can see that is down here in my status bar at section 2. Now, why do I care about that? You might not. But what that does is it gives us the ability to be able to protect the form and say only protect section 1 and leave section 2 open, which in this case is for office use only. So that's one of the possibilities in terms of working with it. Just wanted to give you just a little context about what that option looks like in terms of working with it. So how do we make this work for us? Well, first of all, we want to test this out. We've kind of looked at some of these options, but we want to test this out so that we can keep it protected so that people are only filling out what we want them to, and that they're not changing the layout or anything else, because we created this amazing form, this amazing table to be able to build this form. So here's what we do. Come back up to developer, and here is restrict editing. Now this is also available under the review tab. Next, we will say editing restrictions, allow only this type of editing in the document, and in this case, filling in forms. So there's other options like track changes and comments, but we want filling in forms. And I'm going to also go to this select sections because this particular document has multiple sections. I'll close that. For some reason, it's not displaying very well. There we go. So I'm only protecting section 1, which keeps section 2 available. And we'll okay. Now I'll start enforcing the protection. Typically, if you are in charge of this form, you will want to apply a password to it, simply so that people cannot unprotect it with that. However, the problem is that your support team, like K-Score Technologies, is not going to be able to tell you or unlock that password. So it's good if you have these kinds of things where you might do password protection, that you kind of have a department-wide agreed upon password, not something that's cryptic and only unique to you, which means that no one else, if someone leads an organization, nobody knows what that password is. So for our purposes today, I won't put in a password, but I just want to stress that it's case sensitive and it's something you need to be careful about. It's a low-level password, but for just the curious that want to kind of click around, at least they won't unprotect this form. It's also good to make sure that when you make a form available, my recommendation is that you set it up so it's read only, so that if someone opens it up, they have to save it under a new name, and that you don't get people saving on top of the same form over and over again. So now that I've got this protected or restricted the editing, let's try it out. I can click here and choose a date. I can click here and just start typing. I can click into and put in an extension, but notice that with this, I don't have any formatting. I don't have any options. It's just regular text. I'll choose an item here. Remember, I mentioned that this is then a combo box. This is a different control so that I could allow for direct input. And that's what I'm doing here. So that is an option besides just the drop down. Whereas in this case, with this drop down, I only have these 3 choices. Here I want to check this, yes, and I'd like 2 tickets. Now, remember this format is needed. Let's say that I'll put in, I'm going to change this to 4. Okay, I might not need 2 tickets. If I wanted to, I could highlight this. And it decided not to behave correctly for me, but that's okay. That rich text format I may have just picked the wrong type for that, and I could go and look at that, but this should allow for some direct formatting with this. Now, finally, if I was the recipient of this, that is, if someone emailed it to me, or if they just put it on the network or otherwise, I could come in here and put in comments because I did not protect this section too. So that's the idea then of adding form controls to a table, being able to restrict or protect it so that now this is available for us to use. And as I mentioned, make sure that the shared copy is one that doesn't have any of these answers in it, and that you've changed it so it's read only. So that way people will save it under a new name, and it becomes an easy way to gather information by using the tools that are already built into Word. And by the way, we can not only click from these, we could also just hit the tab key. And that's why we have those controlled entries as well for that. I hope that's giving you some great options and ideas of how you can really leverage and work with these features. So we've had the opportunity to then explore what's possible as you're working with tables and forms in Microsoft Word. We invite you to join us the second Tuesday of every month for these K-Squared Technology training webinars. So they're on the second Tuesday of every month. Coming up, we have Microsoft PowerPoint tips and tricks. Then we'll shift into Microsoft Excel. How can we transform data with Power Query? We'll give you just a getting started look at this really useful tool built into Excel. And then we'll come back and explore some additional Microsoft Word features. That is what's possible with mail merge, even in a digital world. How can we use mail merge, for instance, for emails and for customizing documents and looking for ways to be more productive? So we hope that you will join us again for this training series. Now, I certainly appreciate, thank you for joining us every month for these. When we finish in a few minutes, a survey will pop up on your screen, and we welcome your comments as to what you'd like to see in the future for these training webinars. So definitely share those, your input and those topics. We hope you enjoyed this look at how to build tables and forms in Microsoft Word. How can we help you to be more productive? Please reach out to K-Squared Technologies for help with your IT services and to support you with Microsoft technologies. Thanks for joining us.